eternal existence. And he also bestows eternal sustenance on every spiritual entity, is known as Sandhini. And this aspect of spiritual energy pervades all time, place, object, etc. So if existence of any object, including existence of the Lord himself, is manifest by this potency named Sandhini. And then what is Samvit? So Srila Jiva Goswami further defines what is Samvit. Samvid rupopi yaya samvetti samvedayati cha sa samvit. Although the Lord is Samvit Rupo, is the personification of all knowledge. But yaya, by this energy, samvetti, he manifests his own function of knowledge, and samvedayati, he also bestows knowledge upon others. So any knowledge in the material or spiritual worlds, if any knowledge is present, that is present because of one aspect of the Lord's energy, that is Samvit. So any existence that is there in the material or spiritual worlds, that existence is due to the Sandhini aspect. Any knowledge is due to the Samvit aspect. And Hladini, Hlada rupopi yaya samvid utkata rupaya tam hladam samveti samvedayati cha sa hladini. And even though he is full of bliss, the aspect of spiritual energy by which he experiences as well as makes others experience spiritual bliss is known as Hladini. So any bliss within the spiritual world, any bliss within the material world is created by the aspect of energy known as Hladini. So these are the three aspects: Sandhini aspect, Samvit aspect, Hladini aspect. So in short, when we are in the spiritual world, if we see any object, for example, we see a kalpavriksha tree in the spiritual world, or we see a dhenu, a cow in the spiritual world. So existence of those objects is caused by the Sandhini aspect of his internal energy. Now, our knowledge that this is a cow, this is a kalpavriksha, and what are the characteristics of cow, what are the characteristics of kalpavriksha, any knowledge whatsoever in the spiritual world is carried out by the Samvit aspect of the spiritual energy. And if we feel any bliss in the spiritual world, that is ensured by the Hladini aspect of the spiritual energy. So these are the three aspects in short of the Lord's potency: Sandhini, Samvit and Hladini. And beyond these three, no other aspects of energy are needed. These three aspects manifest in millions and millions of ways in order to facilitate existence in the spiritual world. So that is a short explanation of what Srila Prabhupada is trying to say. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Dandavat pranams.
No problem.
Prabhuji, just one quick question. You said all these three energies are in the spiritual world. Did you say Hladini, the blissful aspect, is both in the spiritual and material world, or only in the spiritual world, Prabhuji?
These three aspects are both in the spiritual as well as material world.
Oh,
in the material world, any existence that you see, do you see objects around you? Yes. How are the objects existing? What is keeping the atoms together and not causing them to disintegrate? Which aspect of material energy?
Sandhini.
Do you have knowledge of those aspects, of those objects?
Yes, Prabhuji.
And what is causing knowledge of those objects to exist within your mind? Which aspect of the material energy?
Samvit.
Samvit. So have you experienced pleasure in the material world?
Yes, Prabhuji.
And which aspect of the material energy has caused you to experience pleasure in the material world?
Hladini Sakti.
There it is. You answered your own question, Mataji.
Prabhuji. Thank you so much, Prabhuji. But as an extension to that question, if we are moving forward towards the question answer session, if you are continuing, I'll check my mouse.
No. I just wanted to explain some, because if I continue, it will be 1 hour class and then there's no time for Q&A. So just a short explanation. We can have Q&A now.
Sure, Prabhuji. Is it okay to ask any other questions other than Virat Rupa, or first we want to start with Virat Rupa questions?
Yeah, we want to tackle the elephant in the room. Let's start with Virat Rupa.
Okay. Then it goes to others. I don't have questions on Virat Rupa. Hare Krishna.
Yeah.
Vijay Mhatri, would you like to ask a question based on text 11 that we had asked yesterday?
Yes, Prabhuji. Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, we were reading about the Virat Purusha Rupa, and we read in 2:5:36 that Prabhupada is saying that it is more and less imaginary, the Virat Purusha. But yesterday we read in 2:6:11 that how during all the living entities repose in the belly of the Virat Purusha, and then the heart is the abode of the subtle material bodies of the living beings. So how we understand this, Prabhuji? We are at the same time we are saying that this is imaginary, and then we are discussing all this. Thank you so much.
Okay. So, is any form of the Lord imaginary? My first question to you, Mataji. Vijaya Mataji. Is any form of the Lord imaginary? Please tell me.
Prabhuji, in the same verse we read that 36 that although the universal is one of the features of the Lord.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where did you read that the form of the Lord is imaginary? In the purport,
Prabhuji,
right?
yeah, in the purport. Prabhuji, the verse itself is using the word kalpayanti, and
Very nice.
its
So,
translation is imagine.
yeah. Okay. Let's go to the verse. It is 2.6.30.
The imaginary word is coming in 2:5:36.
2.5.36. Okay. Let's go to 2.5.36.
Guruji, also in 2.6.17, Prabhupada in the purport makes the point, the universal form of the Lord is secondary imagination of the impersonal form of the Lord. That's
Agreed. No problem. So let's see. This is text number 36 in front of us. Yasya iha avayavair lokan kalpayanti manishinah katyadibir adah sapta saptordham jaganadivihi. Great philosophers imagine that the complete planetary systems in the universe are displays of the different upper and lower limbs of the universal body of the Lord. Kalpayanti is the term used. We know what is the meaning of kalpana, Mataji. So, Mataji, how do you translate kalpana?
Kalpana means to imagine something, think
Very,
about something.
very nice. So, Mataji, what is being imagined here?
It's saying, the verse is saying that the great philosophers imagine that the complete planetary system is in the universe are displays of the different upper and lower limbs of the universal body of the Lord. As we were saying that Brahmanas are his mouth, Kshatriyas his arms, Vaishyas his thighs, the Shudras are born of his legs. Then we were talking about how the lower planetary systems are the lower part of his body, and the upper planetary systems are the upper part of his body.
Right. Now, what was imagined? Now, let me give a simple example. Let's say a poet says, let's say a poet says to a particular person has a round face, and the poet says to him, in your face I imagine the moon. So what is imagined, the face or the moon?
Moon.
So in the Lord's body I see all the planetary systems, all the lokas. What is imagined, the Lord's body or the planetary systems?
Planetary systems.
So then why should we say that the Lord's body is imaginary?
So the universal form of the Lord is not imaginary.
Of course, none of the forms of the Lord are imaginary.
Got it, Prabhuji. Thank you so much.
None of the forms of the Lord are imaginary. You know what is imagination? Imagination is called Maya. To say that the Lord's form is made out of Maya becomes Mayavad.
What a relief, Prabhuji. Thank you so much.
Let me push this point further. Let's go to the final verse of this chapter. The final verse of this chapter 2nd canto, 5th chapter. So in the final verse, let's see what is being said. 2.542. Can you see here? Bhurlokah kalpitah.
Yes, Prabhuji.
What is kalpita? What is imagined?
Bhuvarloka.
In Padbhya, through his legs. Bhuvarloka, Nabhi. Bhuvarloka is imagined in his navel. Swarloka is kalpita, imagined in his murdha, in his head. Itiva loka kalpana. This is a kalpana of what? Bhagavan or kalpana of the planetary systems?
Planetary systems.
So 100%. Since many years, many devotees don't understand that the Lord's form is not imaginary. Actually, what is being imagined are the planetary systems. They are being superimposed on the body of the Lord. Why does the yogi do that? Can the yogi directly perceive the spiritual form of the Lord Virat Rupa? Can
No.
the new no. So what does he do? He superimposes these material objects on the body, on the spiritual body of the Virat Rupa, which is Virat Rupa is spiritual, but he imagines these planetary systems to be like the various limbs of the Lord because he can't see the actual spiritual form of the Lord.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. What a relief. Yesterday, the whole day, my mind was saying, if it is imaginary, that why even we were discussing all this? Thank you so much.
It is the form of the Lord is never imaginary. To say that the Lord's form is imaginary means to say that it is made out of illusion, Maya. Such a philosophy is called Mayavad. Only a Mayavadi says that the Lord's form is imaginary. The Lord's form is real. It is Satchidananda. And the yogi who is unable to perceive this Satchidananda form because he has not followed Bhakti Yoga. Therefore, the yogi in the beginning has to use some object, material object, in order to meditate upon the body of the Lord. So what he does is he superimposes these material objects on the spiritual body of the Lord. And he imagines these material planetary systems to be the body of the Lord. So the imagination is that not that the Lord's body is imaginary, but he imagines these things to be the body of the Lord. That is what it is.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Very clear.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhu, how do we understand this in terms of Prabhupada's explanation, where he says, like even in another purport, it says that the conception of the Virat universal form of the Lord as appearing in the material world is imaginary. It is to enable the less intelligent to adjust to the idea of Lord's having form.
Okay, which verse purport is this, Prabhuji?
This is a 1.3.30, Prabhu.
1.3.30.
30, yes.
Okay, let's go to 1.
Uh,
Can you see the verse, Prabhu? Etad rupam bhagavato. This is a rupa. This is a form of whom? Bhagavan. He arupasya, but that Bhagavan has no material form. Then which form? Chid atmana. His form is chit. The verse itself says that the form is chit. But for the yogi, virachitam, it is created out of maya guna. For the yogi, he creates it out of the modes of maya. Basically, that is how the yogi perceives it. Because either it is made out of maya or either it is made out of chit. Can the form be composed both of maya and chit at the same time? No, because both energies don't stay in the same place. They are clearly segregated. So originally he is Chidatma. Chidatma means he is spiritual form. But Virachitam, the yogi imagines it to be composed, Virachitam, of Maya Gunair, of various planetary systems made out of Maya. So that is what. Let's see in the purport. See, the Lord has no, factually the Lord has no material form. It is very clearly mentioned. Factually the Lord has no material form. The translation itself is saying this very clearly. So Prabhupada mentions what is the fact. Now let's go in the purport. Prabhupada also says in the purport, the Virat Rupa is conceived for those who are just neophyte worshippers. For them, the material Virat Rupa is presented. It will be explained in the second canto. Okay. In the Virat Rupa, the material manifestations of different planets have been conceived. So the different planets are conceived as his legs, hands, etc. Actually, all such descriptions are for the neophytes. The neophytes cannot conceive of anything beyond matter. So actually what the yogis conceive, that material conception is not counted in his list of actual forms. So what the yogis conceive is not the actual Virat Roop. The actual Virat Roop is spiritual. And what the yogis perceive is a material conception of that original spiritual Virat Roop. So that cannot be counted as one of the forms of the Lord. So let's see. Yeah, this was the purport. Anything, Prabhu, in this?
Prabhu, the translation, the first line was what I had read.
Yes, okay. The conception of the conception is imaginary. Does it say that the Virat Roop is imaginary? The term imaginary is applied to what? The conception or to the Virat Rupa?
To the conception, Prabhu. Yeah.
So then that is good.
Yes, Prabhu.
I hope everything has fallen in one straight line.
Yes, Prabhu. Thank you so much.
So,
Yes, Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. So yesterday we also have another question.
Mataji, before you move on, I have a more question on this Virat Rupa, if you don't mind.
Yes, Mataji, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So, Prabhuji, you are saying that Virat Rupa is spiritual, but yogic conception is imaginary.
Yeah, obviously. Because the yogi cannot perceive anything spiritual.
So then why Virat Rupa doesn't exist in the spiritual world, Prabhuji?
Why Virat Rupa doesn't
Yeah,
exist?
that's what my understanding. I could be wrong, but my understanding is Virat Rupa and Paramatma doesn't exist in the spiritual world. Can you please elaborate?
It is incorrect to say that Paramatma doesn't exist in the spiritual world. Paramatma exists also in the spiritual world. Where is it said that Paramatma exists also in the spiritual world? Srila Jiva Goswami has said in the Sandarbhas that Paramatma exists in the spiritual world too. There is a special Sandarbha which Srila Jiva Goswami wrote only for Paramatma, that is called Paramatma Sandarbha. I am sharing my screen. You can see Paramatma Sandarbha. Can you see Paramatma Sandarbha?
Yes, Prabhuji.
So, Paramatma Sandarbha. Paramatma Sandarbha, the first sentence of Paramatma Sandarbha. Can you read this, Mataji?
Yes, Prabhuji. Atah Paramatma vivriyate.
Now Paramatma will be described. Okay. Yadyapi, although Paramatmatvam, his function of Paramatma, Vaikunthepi Prabhorasti, is also present in Vaikuntha. There itself in the very beginning, Sri Jiva Goswami is clarifying. Even in Vaikuntha, the function of being a Paramatma is present. So it is not a correct conception to say that the function of Paramatma doesn't exist in the spiritual world.
Okay. Yeah, very interesting, Prabhuji. So, yeah.
It is very important to read the 6 Sandarbhas in order to clarify all the misconceptions that we have. Because without going through the 6 Sandarbhas, one does not get a complete understanding of Srimad Bhagavatam. It is very important to follow Srila Jiva Goswami, because all of us are in his school, whether we realize or we don't realize. All of us are in the school of Srila Jiva Goswami. Whatever Bhakti Vedanta purports we see are translations from, many of them are translations of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary and Srila Jiva Goswami's commentary. So even when we are reading Bhakti Vedanta purports, a lot of what we are reading is from Srila Jiva Goswami and Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Actually, all of us are already in the school of Srila Jiva Goswami. So we should make an effort to read the 6 Sandarbhas in our lifetime in order to clarify all the misconceptions.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. So Virat Rupa also exists in the spiritual world then?
There is nothing mentioned about Virat Rupa in the spiritual world, because Virat Rupa is specifically mentioned in connection only with the material world. Karanodaka Shai Vishnu, Garbhodaka Shai Vishnu, Kshirodaka Shai Vishnu. These are particularly Paramatmas pertaining to the material world. And Virat Rupa is also spoken of particularly in relation to the material world. In relation to the spiritual world, there is nothing, no Virat Rupa has been described in Shastra, but there is nothing which even denies it. So as long as information is not available, I cannot say anything, but at least I can say that the function of Paramatma is present in the spiritual world.
Thank you. Thank you,
Hare
sir.
Krishna, Hare Krishna Prabhu, I have a quick question. So Paramatma in the material world is present as Antaratma within us. So in Paramatma in the spiritual world, how does he exist?
What are the two functions of Paramatma mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, Mataji?
Witnesser.
Upadrashta Anumanta. These are the two functions mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita. I will point out the verse and we can Bhagavad Gita 13.23. I will point out the verse and then these same functions are present in the spiritual world too. Upadrashta Anumanta cha Bharta Bhokta Maheshwara. What does Upadrashta mean? Overseer. What does Anumanta mean? Sanctioner. Bharta, nourisher. Bhokta, the enjoyer. Maheshwara, the Lord. Paramatma iti cha api ukto. This is the definition of Paramatma. So, who is yet in this body there is a transcendental enjoyer who is the Lord, the supreme proprietor, who exists as the Upadrashta, overseer, and Anumanta, permitter. These are the two basic functions of Paramatma, overseer and permitter. And there are other functions also, but these functions are also present in the spiritual world.
So are they present in the Nitya Muktas, Prabhuji?
100%. The Nitya Mukta has a spiritual body. Within the spiritual body is a spiritual heart. Within the spiritual heart is a Paramatma residing with the Jiva.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Prabhuji.
In the Vedanta Sutra commentary, Govinda Bhashya of Srila Baldev Vidyabhushan, he has clarified that the liberated living entities also need a spiritual body who are in the spiritual world. In the material world, the living entity needs a material body. There is only one place where the living entity doesn't need a body. That is the border, because there is no purpose of having a body there. So in the spiritual world, the living entity is gifted with a spiritual body, eternal spiritual body. In the material world, the living entity is gifted with repeated material bodies which are destructible. So in the spiritual world, it has senses. The body has senses. And one of the sense is the heart. Sense organs is the heart. And within the heart is the Paramatma who performs the main functions of Upadrashta and Anumanta in the spiritual world. Paramatmatvam Vaikunthepi Prabhorasti. Srila Jiva Goswami's direct words are a praman for all of us in this regard.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. Prabhu, there was one question yesterday also that was about like at the end of Brahma's day when there's a partial annihilation, what happens to the subtle and gross bodies of the conditioned jivas?
Which annihilation?
Partial annihilation at the end of Brahma's day. This was actually in purport of yesterday.
6:11.
Yeah, same verse, Prabhu, 6:11 in the purport. Prabhupada talks about it.
Yeah.
So in the purport, there's a sentence, Prabhu, where it says at the end of Brahma's night, the creation again takes place, and the living entity reserved within the belly of the Lord are let loose to play their respective parts. And the last sentence says the subtle forms of the living entity take place in the heart of the Supreme Being, and such forms take tangible shape at the time. So that was a question like what happens to the subtle body and the gross body at the time of Brahma's night?
As long as the living entity is not liberated from this material world, the living entity needs a subtle form, subtle body. So, but when the living entities at every night of Brahma, when there is partial destruction, all the living entities enter into the into the womb or into the stomach of the Lord, and when that happens, basically all their collective subtle bodies are reserved within the heart of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When the living entities are to be manifest again, living entities are also agitated because of not being able to manifest their functions for so long. So when the living entities are also manifested because their karmas, their vasanas, their collective vasanas are stored within the heart of the person. Their collective vasanas also, they are agitated to make some, do some activity. So at that time, once again, the living entities are given their respective subtle bodies, and then they receive their gross bodies by the creation of Brahma. So that is what happens. The collective mass of the subtle bodies is reserved in the heart of that personality.
So is this heart of the Virat Purusha or heart of Garbhodakshay Vishnu?
No, the heart of Virat Purusha is being
Virat
described, right? Yes.
And also
Prabhuji,
there was
you said heart of Garbhodakshay Vishnu or Virat Rupa?
No, Virat Purusha. I'm sorry, Virat Purusha.
Okay.
and also Prabhuji at the time of complete annihilation, 100 years of Brahma, then even those jivas who are not yet liberated, what happens to them? Do they go into the body of Mahavishnu and then?
Yeah, they enter into the body of Karanodakasha Vishnu, and then their particular subtle bodies are also maintained within his heart, basically. But that is the sum totality of all the material universes. And when they are sent out, then material universes are also sent out along with it. And then the subtle bodies are also sent out along with it.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, we had this question before, but I want to clarify again. So when the living entities are entering into the Karanodakshai Vishnu, why are we coming back? Though it is a they are saying temporary, but you are going into the body of Karanodakshai Vishnu. So why
Okay.
should we come back? Does it make any sense, Prabhuji?
Because your karmashaya is not yet extinguished. Your sanchit karma is not yet extinguished.
But after residing in Karanodakshai Vishnu's body, everything should be destroyed, right?
Why?
Because he is Bhagwan.
So it doesn't have to, just because he is Bhagwan doesn't mean that it is time. The living entities have entered his body not because they are liberated. The living entities have entered his body because it is destruction time, and they could not attain the fulfillment of their material desires. Their karmas are not over, so they enter into his, still though they don't get liberated, they enter into his body, and once their karmas are complete, their karmas will be completely over, then they will get liberated and they will not have to enter, they will go to the spiritual world.
Okay. So I thought karma will be wiped off by residing in Karanodakshai Vishnu's body.
Then one entry into Karanodakasha Vishnu's body is sufficient for liberation. Why should we aim for bhakti yoga then?
Yeah, Prabhuji. Yes, makes sense, Prabhuji. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, yesterday also one another point came up about that how when the living entity is still not liberated and goes to another womb, then what happens to the subtle body?
When the living entity is not liberated, Vedanta Sutra explains that when the living entity's gross body is destroyed, the living entity still continues to exist in the subtle body. But that subtle body exists only for a few days. And as soon as his subtle body also has to change, because he has to receive a new subtle body. So the living entity, along with all the karma vasanas, he is transferred from one subtle body and then to a new subtle body. The new subtle body consists of his new form, and the new form, the new mind, intelligence, and false ego. Because the old mind cannot exist, because old mind has old impressions. So do we have impressions of previous life in this body?
No, Prabhu. They're like just impressions are there,
No,
but
I mean, no, I mean any memories of previous life.
no, Prabhu.
Mind was wiped off.
Yes,
And do we have the intelligence that we had in the previous body?
of course not.
Intelligence was wiped off.
Yes.
Do we have the ahankar, ego of the previous body?
No, Prabhu.
Ahankar was wiped off. But we received a new subtle body consisting of a new mind, new intelligence, and new false ego. When we grew up from childhood, did we have the intelligence of the past life? What is 2 plus 2 equal to 4? Did we
No.
have, or did we have to cultivate that intelligence again?
Yes, Prabhu.
So it is very clear indication that the jiva receives a new subtle body, but the jiva always needs shelter of a subtle body.
So from where the samskaras come, like impressions, so like who carries the impressions?
The impressions are carried by from one subtle body to another, and there is also a concept known as karana sharir, because there is sthula sharir, sukshma sharir, and there is also another conception known as karana sharir. Karana sharir is the most subtlest form of body that exists for the living entity, which consists only of his vasanas or samskaras or impression. So that Karan Sharir is the Sharir which carries some samskaras from one. That Karan Sharir never changes in all the bodies. Subtle body changes, gross body changes. But Karan Sharir, which is the carrier of all the impressions, it goes from body to body to body to body. That there is a conception in Vedanta called Karan Sharir. So that has to be researched out.
Yeah. Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. So that raises another question. So when a soul gets liberated, does the soul lose the Karana Sharir? Of course, Stula Sharir is lost, and Sukshma Sharir and Karana Sharir are lost too, or?
Yes. Sukshma Sharir is also lost because the soul cannot carry a mental mind, material mind, material intelligence, and material ego into the spiritual world. So Sukshma Deha or subtle body is also destroyed. And his Karana Sharir, all his material impressions are also destroyed at the time of liberation. When he goes to the spiritual world, he carries only the impressions of bhajan and bhakti. So in the spiritual world, he has a completely new identity, a completely fresh set of body, and completely devotional samskaras within his mind, because there is no purpose of carrying any material samskar to the spiritual world.
So in the spiritual world, it also has Karana Sharir, and though it's spiritual, Karana Sharir and Stula Sharir.
Nothing is mentioned about that in the Shastra. What is mentioned about the material world, that I have said. What is mentioned is that in the spiritual world, there is a spiritual body, whether the categorization of Karana, Sthula and Sukshma cannot exist in the spiritual world, because in the spiritual world, everything is Chit, spiritual. It is as subtle as possible. There's nothing subtler than that. It is as subtle as possible. So this distinction of Sthul, Sukshma and Karan is only in the material world. What distinctions are there in the spiritual world, that we learn only when we enter there. There are some acharyas who have said that the spiritual body is composed of 5 spiritual substances, but that is a completely different discussion altogether. But certainly this categorization doesn't exist.
So we don't get a subtle body in the spiritual world. Everything is spiritual. That's it. The body and the
100%. What is the purpose of saying subtle and gross? If you say subtle there, then the relative term gross should also exist. There's no purpose of saying subtle and gross. Subtle is a relative term which distinguishes it from the term gross. That is why we call it subtle.
Right. Good. Okay. Thank you, Prabhuji. It's clear.
So Prabhu, just in relationship to your answer, so we know the Sukshma Sharir consists of mind, intelligence, and false ego. What is the Karana Sharir composed of? Like you said, all the impressions are stored. So what
all the vasanas and samskaras from all the lives, which have not been washed away by bhakti. That is what it consists of.
So, but like in terms of the elements, can we say like, no
material elements are ascribed to that. No material elements can be ascribed to it. It is subtler even than the subtle body. It is carrying only the impressions of the various past lives. It can be washed off only by 2 processes, by jnana and by bhakti. By karma, samskaras are added to it. By jnana, it can be washed off, you can get impersonal liberation. By bhakti, it can be washed off, you can get devotional world, spiritual world. There are only two processes to wash off the Karana Sharira, which is jnana and bhakti. And both processes lead to different destinations. The jnani ends up merging into Brahmajyoti, the devotee ends up going to the spiritual world. But there are no material elements which are ascribed to it. Because if a material element is ascribed to it, it will become either subtle or gross body.
Thank you, Prabhu. And in relationship to that, one more question, Prabhu, is you said we get a new Shukshma Sharir, right? Every time.
Right.
So we do understand that how, the example is given that all the ingredients in the womb is given by the mother as the efficient cause. And so how does the ingredients of the subtle body actually come since it's getting a new, because, previously I had the conception that the same subtle body that continues into a new body, but
Right.
and then also another question in relationship to that is like, we have these cases of like people remembering their past lives and things. Is that again stored in the Karana since all
Okay.
this stuff?
Yeah. So, how does a particular living entity get a new subtle body? So as soon as the living entity dies, his old subtle body is there. After immediate death, when the gross body is still there, but his subtle body is also there. So subtle body hovers around the gross body that we all know. Now the gross body is burnt or it is buried or whatever. If it is burnt, immediate destruction is there. If it is buried, gradual destruction of the gross body is there. Still the subtle body continues to exist. Now, as soon as the death has taken place, he has had some memory at the final moment. Whatever memory he has had at the final moment, plus his collection of sanchit karma, whatever his karma is there, has already determined his next subtle body. So now it's no longer a process of something he can do. Now it's only a matter of time. Whatever was his next subtle body was already decided at the moment of his death. Whatever was the next subtle body, based on his final remembrance and plus his sanchit karma, his what residual karma. So that it was already decided at that moment. But that subtle body now starts getting formed. So that subtle body is growing. Meanwhile, this subtle body's contents, this subtle body is gradually getting destroyed. The Jivatma, along with the Karan Sharir, move on to the next subtle body. And then this subtle body is placed within the womb of a particular mother. And since it has already been determined by the karma, so mother is just the, basically she is just the, she is said to be the instrumental cause of bringing him into the material world. So the living entity's own karma is the actual cause of bringing him into that womb. Only the mother becomes the instrument of the soul receiving a particular body, nationality, race, caste, creed, bodily features, bodily defects, etc. So mother only becomes an instrumental cause of all of that. So that is the answer to the query.
Toward cases of those who remember their previous life.
Those who remember their previous. It is also said that within the womb, a person remembers his previous life. Yes or no? So in the third canto, when it is described that the living entity remembers in the previous life he was this, and so our acharyas make a comment about that. Our acharyas say that this is only the living entity who has been a devotee in previous lives. Not all living entities remember the Lord or their previous lives in the womb. Some living entities are covered with heavy ignorance. They don't remember their previous lives. Only certain living entities who are either devotees or are Mahayogis, Gyanis, they remember their previous lives. So the Lord, this is a special exceptional facility made for by the Lord, that they are able to remember some of their previous lives. That sort of a person is called as Jati Smara. Jati Smara means he remembers his previous Jati or his previous birth. So that is known as a Jati Smara. So that person is an exception. That person is not the rule. What is the rule amongst 84 lakh species of life is mind, body, and intelligence are put into a, what is it called? How do you destroy paper in the US? There is a machine which destroys the paper.
Shredder.
Shredder, yeah. They are shredded. So that is what happens with them.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. It's
Prabhu,
7.
yesterday again one question came up, like when it is shredded, so where does it go? Like the mind merges with the mind, or the intelligence merges with the intelligence?
I mean, why should it merge? Why does
Means the earth has the layer of, all these subtle and gross elements. So where actually, because yesterday when this question came up, so next question, follow-up question was that where it does go. Like paper, when it's shredded, it goes somewhere, right?
Yeah, right. So similarly, these elements end up with their original elements. So basically, there are 7 layers within the universe. So these layers are basically made out of all these elements. So these end up, all the subtle elements end up in their respective place within the universe.
Yes, thank you. Okay, anyone else has any question?
Prabhu, is it okay? It's 7:55. Can we ask one more question?
I am here.
Okay.
You can take as long as you want to ask questions. I am here. No problem.
Mati, did you have a question? I had someone.
Oh, I don't have a question. The only thing today was smashed is my conception of Paramatma, because till now I was thinking that there is no Paramatma in the spiritual world. I don't know how many of you all have this conception.
Equally, Mother, I'm echoed with your point. Yes.
Yeah,
Prabhu
because
was
in Bhagavad Gita
bringing
also it is mentioned. What do you think, Aditya and Prabhu? Do you know that Paramatma was there?
No.
No. So today it got smashed because what's the need of Paramatma? Like if we are just, our body is totally made up of chit, we don't have any gross or subtle, we don't have any heart where the soul resides or Paramatma resides. We are just in the spiritual body. So
yeah, but a spiritual body has spiritual senses, and one of the sense organ is the heart. If there is no heart in the spiritual body, how will the devotee experience rasa?
Like one point that, when Prabhuji was explaining that, I could relate to is like here in this material world, the distinction is very prominent because the gross, subtle body, they're all material elements. So needs a clear distinction of Atma, Paramatma. But in the spiritual world, as Prabhu was saying, everything is chit, everything is spiritual. So that's what I was thinking, that maybe that's why the distinction is not very clearly mentioned, because it's all spiritual there. Is that right understanding?
Yeah, and many times the distinction is not mentioned because Shastras mainly speak of the situation in the material world. The main purpose of Shastra is to help us get out, and then what is there in the spiritual world is obviously there is the entirety of the Vedas with all its branches are there in the spiritual world to help us explain what is there in the spiritual world. The entire Samvit Shakti automatically makes us understand everything that is there in the spiritual world. But main purpose of Shastra in the material world is to explain the situation in the material world, and certain portions explain spiritual world also. But that's not the main focus of Shastra in the material world. Main focus is describing the situation in which we find ourselves. That is the main purpose of Shastra, and how to get out of here, and a little description of what is there in the spiritual world. So that is what is the main purpose of Shastra. So that's what it is, and not much information is compared to the information about the material world. Not much information about the spiritual world is there. See the Bhagavatam 5th canto. So much information about the material world. Let's see how much information about the spirit. Vaikuntha, direct information about Vaikuntha is there in Srimad Bhagavatam. You'll find sparse information about Vaikuntha in the Srimad Bhagavatam, because it's something to be experienced. It is Anubhav Vastu. To try to describe it in words is actually to do some sort of an injustice to the spiritual world, because words cannot fully describe the spiritual world.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam. I just wanted to say one thing. Always in commentary of Prabhupada, everywhere he talks one word: this material world is perverted reflection of the spiritual world. It means, as you said very clearly, if the real object is not there, then where the the perverted reflection will be. So this is a very perfect statement. So everything, and you explain that Atma, soul, body, only difference, but really exist. Only then we see the reflection perverted or reverse or whatever we can call. But these things exist in really in spiritual world. That's why we see it here, and we very nicely explain that how to make us to understand, give material example, because always our mind wants to go and see, visualize, whatever. That's what scientists do. So it makes life a little easier to get the basis of some understanding, but things exist in spiritual. That's why we see the reflection. That's what I
Right.
understand. Hare Krishna.
Right. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
So conclusion, we should read 6 Sandarbhas by Jiva Goswami to have the clear understanding.
100%. 100%. There is a statement by Srila Prabhupada about the 6 Sandarbhas. And let me try to find out. Yeah. I will share this statement. Mataji, you can read the statement of Srila Prabhupada. He is giving a lecture on Srimad Bhagavatam 1.1.1. Kindly read, Mataji.
Jiva Goswami has got 6 Sandarbhas, thesis: Bhagavad Sandarbha, Krishna Sandarbha, Tattva Sandarbha, Preeti Sandarbha, like that. So these books are, I don't think it is published in English. So these Sandarbhas are so philosophically discussed that throughout the whole world, there is not a single philosopher who can defy these Jiva Goswami's 6 Sandarbhas.
So this is Prabhupada proudly speaking about the 6 Sandarbhas. Now, there are many more statements like this about the 6 Sandarbhas. And see here, in 1956, this is from Back to Godhead, Prabhupada himself is writing. Mataji, can you read?
Yes, Prabhuji. The Jiva Goswami happened to be the beloved nephew of the 2 principal Goswamis who were real brothers in worldly relation. So Jiva Goswami was the greatest philosopher of his time, and his 6 books, namely the Sandarbhas, Tattva Sandarbha, Bhagavad Sandarbha, Krishna Sandarbha, Preeti Sandarbha, Karma Sandarbha, and Bhakti Sandarbha, are unique philosophical traces in advanced spiritual science. Late Pandit Paramatnath,
Tarkabhushan. Pramathanath Tarkabhushan.
sorry, lost track where I was. I will find it. Okay.
I've highlighted it.
Okay. One of the greatest Sanskrit scholars and authority of the modern age remarked in one of his lectures that Jiva Goswami is the greatest philosopher of all ages in the world. This recommendation was certainly not an exaggeration, but one should realize the truth if one has the required energy and time to go through the most subtle and scholarly expositions of the above spiritual thesis.
Yes, one would realize the truth. Prabhupada says one would realize the truth if one has the required energy and time to go through the most subtle and scholarly expositions of the 6 spiritual theses. So this is the glory of the 6 Sandarbhas in the very words of Srila Prabhupada himself. What more do I need to say? Prabhupada himself is.
So much, Prabhuji.
So,
Prabhu, you had a question, you can go ahead.
Yeah, Mataji, can I ask one question or somebody else has it?
Aditya Narayan Prabhu was supposed to ask.
okay,
Okay.
Anandi Mata, you can
yeah.
go ahead. I was also going to mention that.
After you, Prabhuji, it's okay. Sorry, everybody should get a chance.
No,
I
please
will
go
wait.
ahead. Mata, you go ahead.
Oh, okay, Prabhuji. This might be a stupid question. Prabhuji, you are saying how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu flipped the Hare Krishna Mahamantra for the benefit, right? So by doing Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna first, we are getting additional benefit of destroying material desires, right? Did I understand correctly?
Yeah.
So sorry, Prabhu, if I'm not trying to argue with anything, but so that does it mean that if the mantra starts with Hare Rama, that does not destroy material desires? That's what it means?
No. When the mantra, I had used technical terms when I had explained why was the mantra flipped. Why was in the Upanishad, you will find in almost all the editions the mantra with Hare Ram first. Why do we find it with Hare Krishna first in our sampradaya? I had said that the mantra is not flipped by a person. There is a technique of reversing the mantra given in Shastra. It is called Utpatti Nyas and Samhar Nyas. I will share the screen again. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, it is given. Can you read the highlighted section, Mataji?
Sorry, Prabhuji, I'm driving. Can
Oh, acha.
somebody?
Yeah,
Sorry,
can
Prabhuji.
somebody else read?
I can read. Then one should chant the mantra in reverse, beginning from the last syllable, ya, while touching the parts of his body in the reverse order. These two processes are known as Utpatti Nyas and Samhara Nyas, respectively.
And so when the mantra is chanted in sequence, it is called Utpatti Nyas. When the mantra is chanted in reverse sequence, it is called Samhar Nyas. What is the meaning of the, can anybody tell me the meaning of the word Utpatti and Samhar?
Utpatti means production and Samhara means destruction.
Destruction.
Yeah. So Utpatti means creation, Samhara means destruction. So Vedic mantras, they are used for the creation of the four Purusharthas. What are the four Purusharthas of life?
Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha.
And Samhar is used for the destruction of the four Purusharthas, basically, even beyond Moksha, Moksha and beyond Moksha, which is Prema. So basically, when the mantra is chanted in reverse, it is not for attaining the four Purusharthas, it is for attaining something which is beyond the four Purusharthas.
That is destruction of material desires.
100%.
Yeah, thank you so much for explaining again, Prabhuji. Now it's more clear. Yeah, thank you so much, Prabhuji. Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu. So one question, Prabhu, just like sometimes in the Bhagavatam we go like so much into like technical details and aspects of like understanding this point, that point, and we know Bhagavatam is Krishna himself, and the goal of the Bhagavatam is finally to develop love, dharma, projita, kaitava, etc. So, like when we are discussing these technical details, sometimes it's easy to just get caught in the technical details. Like, should one actually try to like kind of correct one mood so that to see how, yes, this creation happening, Virat Purusha is there, and all these, like, it is related to Krishna, but I'm thinking like, what is the mood, like not to get caught up with just technical and actually see it as bhakti, as something that's helping us progress in our spiritual life.
Yeah. This conflict is often there. The devotees, when they study the Bhagavatam, they find it a bit too technical. So many details are there. And then they study. And they study, then they sing, well, what's the end purpose of all of the end purpose is that we have to perform bhakti. So when they are reading Sambandha Gyan, Sambandha means their relationship with Lord, their relationship with the material world. And they feel ultimately I have to practice Abhidheya, which is bhakti, in order to get the prayojan, which is Krishna Prem. So why spend so much time on learning Sambandha Gyan? Because whatever Bhagavatam is teaching, a lot of it is Sambandha Gyan, how you are related to the Lord, to the world, etc. It is Sambandha Gyan. Then the answer to this is that devotees, see, on one side, devotees also say we want to become preachers. And then devotees later, if they say, no, we want to do bhajan, ultimately, what do we have to do? Bhajan. So yeah, if we only want to do bhajan, then there is no need of getting into technicalities. But if we want to do prachar, if you want to preach, obviously preaching means someday somebody will come and ask a question. And then we can't say, oh, well, I'm a bhajananandi, so let's move ahead. So if we are pracharak, if our society is based on prachar, then we should understand that all the technical details should be, and we should know, read the scripture in its original language, understand the technical details, get all our doubts resolved, and then from there onwards we can preach happily. But if we ourselves are not clear with, and our own doubts are not resolved, then we may end up speaking that those same doubtful positions to others, which is actually, honestly speaking, not so good prachar. Good prachar is, well, see, in the teaching industry, I was taught one thing: it is better not to teach something, but don't teach something incorrect. That is what I was taught on day one. This principle was told. So, I mean, better, if you are not confident, don't teach something, but don't teach something incorrect to the student, because the student carries it sometimes for his entire life. Sometimes the student carries it for 10-15 years, and after 15 years the student has to undergo a humiliating situation where he painfully learns that what I was learning was like incorrect for 10-15 years, and then he doesn't even remember who was it who taught me this incorrect conception. So that, therefore, it's better to, as a preacher, we think that between Bhajananandi and Goshtyanandi is the safer position. But Goshtyanandi also has to do a lot of homework in order to actually speak. So if we want to become Goshtyanandi, then we should know our Goshti very well. And if we want to become Bhajananandi, then we should know our Bhajan very well. That is the answer. As long as we are preachers, we have to know Tattva. Because what we are speaking to others is Tattva. And somebody may ask us, does Paramatma exist in the spiritual world? When we are preaching, I read the Bhagavad Gita and I saw there's a spiritual world. And does Krishna exist in the spiritual world as Paramatma? Now, if I tell him, well, no, it's only in the material world. So then that person may accept that answer and go and speak it to 10 more people. And then in that way, an incorrect position is propagated. So we should try to avoid that. And I myself have been taught incorrect Siddhantas in the initial days of my spiritual life. I have had a painful experience in correcting myself. And therefore, after a few years, I made a resolve that unless I am very confident, I will not say that this is the particular Siddhanta. That's all.
And Prabhuji, isn't it that if we know our tattva very well, that helps in bhajan also?
It helps to some degree in knowing it, having bhajan, in doing bhajan, but ultimately bhajan is a function purely of bhakti. So those who are bhajananandis, they sometimes don't even bother about all the tattvas so much. Bhakti Devi, independently makes arrangement for them. So bhajan is mainly carried out by the effort of Bhakti Devi, and she automatically gives the required gyan, whatever is required for bhajan. That much knowledge she gives to this person who is performing bhajan. So it's not that the person who's performing bhajan first needs to collect tattva. If that would be the case, then bhakti would become dependent on jnana. But is bhakti dependent on jnana, or is jnana dependent on bhakti?
Jnana.
So bhakti, let's always keep Bhakti Devi independent. She will produce the required jnana in the sadhaka who is executing bhajan. And that is the resolution.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji.
Prabhu, just thank you for that answer, Prabhu. So one point I'm thinking is, just this point, like Paramatma in the spiritual world, like I was thinking of like in third canto how Maitreya Rishi actually tells to Vidura, he says, "Yatha mati yata shrutva," right? Whatever I have heard, and then how I've understood with my intelligence, that's what I'm speaking. So the point, like Paramatma in the spiritual world, like we read Bhagavad Gita and we get the idea that, okay, Bhagavad Gita, Paramatma has the function of Upadrishta, Anumanta, that's what Paramatma. So with our intelligence, one may think that, well, in the spiritual world, what is the need for that function? And then based on that, one may just make the point that, yes, Paramatma is not there in the spiritual world. So we are just using our intelligence to what I have heard. And, unless you actually showed this verse and you actually made that point, you would have never, not known that point that Paramatma is there in the spiritual world. So up to what extent should we be willing to answer questions posed by others? Because, there may always be like our answers are limited because we are not completely learned as much.
100%. So it's impossible for a person to have 100% knowledge of everything. But learning should be for the clarification of one's own doubts. Like the fire of knowledge should be within one's heart. First doubts are within one's own heart. Like sometimes people think I will solve everybody else's doubts. But the thing is, the best way to do that is to solve all of one's own doubts. Even if one becomes a great sage, learned sage, sometimes it is possible that even a learned sage may speak something which is not according to Tattva. Says who? Says Srimad Bhagavatam itself. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, there is a nice verse, 10:77:30. And this verse is, Evam vadanti rajasi rishayah kecha na anvitaha. And Prabhuji, you can read the translation.
Such is the account given by some sages, O wise king, but those who speak in this illogical way are contradicting themselves, having forgotten their own previous statements.
So Shukadeva Goswami himself says some sages describe that Krishna fell in illusion when Shalva attacked his kingdom. So then Shukadeva Goswami says those sages who say that Krishna fell in illusion when Shalva attacked his kingdom, these people are contradicting themselves and their own previous statements. Although they are sages, Rishayaha is the term used in the original verse. So Rishayaha Kecha, some rishis say that, but na anvitaha. These statements are illogical basically. Why? Yat swavacho viruddhyata. They're against their own previous statements. So sometimes even rishis end up making statements like that. But our aim should be to purify our knowledge as much as possible. How much is the fire of knowledge burning in our heart? To that extent we will study, and to that extent we will be able to solve the doubts of others. There is a very nice verse which I learnt in my childhood. One of my teachers was a Kashmiri Shaivite. He told me one verse: Swapakshan parapakshamscha nisheshena na vedayah sa swayam samshayam bodhau nimajjam starayet katham. Swapakshan, one who doesn't know his own side. Parapakshamscha, and doesn't know other people's side. Nisheshena, completely. Sa swayam samshayam bodhau nim. He himself is drowning in the ocean of doubts. Starayet katham. How will a drowning person rescue others? So that he set the gold standard for me, because he taught this verse in childhood. This verse is from an Acharya of Kashmir Shaivism. But this verse is perfectly applicable to me also as a Gaudiya Vaishnava. I should know my Swapaksha. What is my Swapaksha is Gaudiya Vaishnava Dhara. But, and therefore Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami says the same in Chaitanya Charitamrita, that Siddhanta Baliya Chitte Na Karaha Alas. You might have heard this verse.
Yes.
At least in your own Siddhantas, learning your own Siddhantas, don't exhibit laziness. We may exhibit laziness in knowing somebody else's Siddhanta. That's optional. Knowing somebody else's Siddhantas is optional for us. But if we are a pracharak, if we are a preacher, then knowing our own Siddhanta cannot be optional for us. At least that is how, if I go to a university and I'm appointed as a professor is basically a pracharak, a preacher of a particular science. And if the professor says, well, ultimately, what's the use of all this knowledge? So then university will say, well, ultimately, what is the use of having you? So, so the professor should know his science very well. The lawyer should know his law very well. Otherwise, he cannot do justice to his field of expertise. So that is what it is.
Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Prabhu, I'm really sorry. You are so merciful. You are giving us so much time, but I have to leave because I have to
Oh,
work.
thank you. I had absolutely no problems extending the time. I just wanted to see how long you are comfortable. Now, if you wish to end, we can end now, Prabhuji.
I don't know if someone else would like to ask.
Can I ask
Prabhuji has to leave. He said, you have to leave, right? You said?
Yes, Prabhu, I have to leave, but the call could continue.
question?
Someone wants
That is okay. Otherwise, I can check it. Yeah.
Okay.
It's okay, Prabhuji. I will ask in the evening.
It's better if evening also, that devotees can also get ahead with their morning and do some other sevas.
So shall I ask Prabhuji?
No,
Chaitanya
Mataji,
Mataji, you
you
want
can
to
ask.
continue, call?
No, Arundhati Mataji, you can ask in the evening because it's
Yeah.
already 8:50,
Okay.
8:20.
Yeah. Hare
We all
Krishna.
have to carry out our morning duties. But thank you, Prabhu. Thank you for all your answers. And I really accept it's such a humiliating situation, at least for me, that all these years I've been preaching so wrong. So I think so either I should stop preaching and cultivate my knowledge further. But
No,
thank you.
no. Whatever one should continue to preach, but one should only speak verified knowledge. One should not altogether stop preaching. One should continue to preach, but one should only speak knowledge which is 100% verified, correct, and bona fide, and we can quote our sources. If we can quote our sources, then our knowledge is
Yes, Prabhu, like all these years we have been hearing about this Paramatma, about this Jiva, about these subtle bodies. But we have also heard from our seniors, but we never dare to ask, that what's the source of it. So we have been preached wrong and we are preaching wrong in future. So as you rightly correct that first we have to understand properly and then go ahead. So thank you so much, Prabhu. And thank you everyone for joining us, and hope we'll see everybody in the evening. Prabhu will give discourse in the evening at Gopinath Acharya Prabhu's and Pratna Mataji's home. So if you have any further doubts or any further clarification, or if you are interested in any and more Krishna Katha, then please do come in the evening. So yes, I think Prabhu, we can stop now.
Yeah. So, and also like there are people from out of town here, out of state. So on the same Zoom call, same Zoom ID, we'll also have the evening class. So in case you're not able to come in person, you can log into the same Zoom ID in the evening.
So what time, Prabhu? Hare Krishna.
6:30 p.m. will start.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Hare Krishna Prabhu. So much, such wonderful, very clear answers with all references, Shastra. You really like set the standard that this is what we need to aspire for. So thank you so much for your time and your inspiration and wonderful answers. Hare Krishna. Humble obeisances to you, Prabhu. Thank you so much.
My pranams. My pranams. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so
much,
Thank you so
Hare
much,
Krishna, Prabhu,
Hare Krishna.
So much, Prabhuji.
for such a detailed answers and all. Truly
Thank you,
blessed and all. Just that last 10 minutes, I have to move out of my laptop, but I hope we will all get that recording so that we can hear it.
Yes, Prabhuji.
Sure.
Yes.
Vancha kalpataruscha kripa sindhu bhaivacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namo anant koti Vaishnav Vrinda ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Granth Raj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, His Grace Hari Parshad Prabhu ki jai.
Jai.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Thank you so
Wonderful.
much, Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Thank you. Hare Krishna devotees.